My name is Alara Vance, and I am a cartographer by trade, though my true passion lies in the quiet, untamed corners of the world. For years, my work has been a meticulous dance between the tangible and the unseen, translating the contours of the earth into lines and symbols, always seeking the hidden narratives etched into the landscape. My expeditions, often solitary, are less about conquest and more about communion. A deep, almost spiritual engagement with the wild. I am a woman of 32, with a pragmatic mind honed by years of scientific discipline, yet possessing an artist's eye for the sublime and the subtly unsettling. My hair, a practical, dark braid, often escapes in wisps around my face, a testament to hours spent outdoors, exposed to wind and sun. My hands, though capable of delicate precision with a compass and pen, bear the caluses of rock climbing and trail blazing. I seek patterns, order, and the logic of the natural world, a pursuit that has, until now, always offered a comforting sense of control. This journey into the ancient redwood forests of Northern California was meant to be another such endeavor. A mapping of forgotten trails, a quiet escape into the grandeur of giants. It was meant to be a sanctuary. It became anything but. The air, even at dawn, hung heavy and damp, carrying the rich, cloying scent of decaying wood, wet earth, and the sharp, clean tang of pine. It was a smell unique to these ancient groves, a primal perfume that promised both life and an unfathomable depth of time. My boots, already slick with dew, crunched softly on a carpet of fallen needles and moss as I stepped onto the trailhead. The silence was immediate, profound, and almost physical, a thick blanket woven from the absence of wind and the muffling embrace of the towering redwoods. These weren't just trees, they were colossal, living monuments, their trunks rising like fluted columns into a perpetual twilight, even as the sun began its slow ascent above the distant peaks. Sunlight, when it managed to pierce the dense canopy, fractured into ethereal shafts, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the humid air, creating an almost sacred, cathedral-like atmosphere. This was my comfort zone, my sanctuary, a place where the vastness of nature dwarfed human concerns into insignificance. I adjusted the straps of my pack, the familiar weight a reassuring presence against my shoulders, and began my trek deeper into the emerald heart of the forest. My initial objective was straightforward: to survey a series of old logging roads and game trails that had long since been reclaimed by the relentless growth of the forest. My map, a detailed topographical sheet I'd painstakingly annotated, showed a network of faint, dashed lines, hinting at paths less traveled, perhaps even forgotten. I preferred these ghost trails, where the whispers of the past mingled with the vibrant pulse of the present. The first few hours passed in a rhythm of quiet observation. I noted the intricate patterns of ferns unfurling, the vibrant splash of fungi on fallen logs, the occasional flash of a Steller's jay, its raucous call a brief punctuation in the pervasive quiet. The fog, a constant companion in this region, began to thicken, not as a dense, blinding wall, but as a soft, ethereal mist that clung to the undergrowth and softened the edges of the colossal trees. It was the kind of fog that made the world feel smaller, more intimate, yet also subtly disorienting, blurring the familiar into something slightly alien. The constant fog drip from the canopy became a pervasive auditory backdrop, a soft, rhythmic patter that, in the deepening silence, began to take on an unsettling quality, like slow, deliberate footsteps moving just beyond my sight. Around midday, I veered off the main, barely discernible trail, following a particularly faint line on my map that promised a shortcut through a less explored section of old growth. This was where the true work began, where the forest truly asserted its wildness. The undergrowth grew thicker, the ground softer and spongier with accumulated organic matter, muffling my footsteps until I felt like a phantom moving through a silent world. The light grew dimmer still, the perpetual twilight of the redwoods deepening into something akin to dusk, even though my watch insisted it was barely noon. It was here, amidst a particularly dense cluster of ancient redwoods, that I encountered the first anomaly. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a feeling, a sudden, profound drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the ambient fog. It was as if I had stepped into a pocket of absolute cold, a chill that seeped into my bones despite my layers. My breath plumed in front of me, a stark white against the deep greens and browns of the forest. I stopped, my hand instinctively going to the compass clipped to my pack strap. The needle, usually a steady, reliable guide, was spinning wildly, erratically, as if caught in an invisible magnetic storm. I frowned, tapping the casing. It was a high-quality instrument, never failed me before. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps a localized magnetic anomaly, some strange mineral deposit beneath the earth, but the cold persisted, a silent, unnatural presence. Then I saw it, etched into the bark of a colossal redwood. Too high to be easily reached by human hands, was a symbol. It wasn't graffiti, nor was it a natural marking. It was a series of interlocking geometric shapes, precise and unnervingly symmetrical, yet utterly alien. It looked almost like a brand, burned into the ancient wood, though there was no charring, no visible damage beyond the symbol itself. It pulsed faintly, or perhaps it was just the trick of the dim light and my straining eyes, a subtle, almost imperceptible shimmer that made my skin prickle. My pragmatic mind immediately sought explanations. A prank, an elaborate piece of land art, but the sheer scale of the tree, the height of the mark, and the unsettling precision of the symbol defied easy answers. This wasn't a casual carving. It felt deliberate, ancient and deeply out of place. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches from the bark. The cold intensified, radiating from the symbol itself, a palpable chill that felt less like temperature and more like a draining of warmth, of life. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the air, a low thrumming that I felt more in my teeth than heard with my ears. It was then that the silence, which had been a comforting presence, twisted into something menacing. The usual forest sounds, the rustle of unseen creatures, the distant call of birds, the gentle sway of branches, were utterly absent. Only the rhythmic, unsettling, fog, drip continued, now sounding less like water and more like something else. Something heavy and deliberate, moving just beyond the veil of mist. A primal instinct screamed at me to turn back, to dismiss this as a trick of the light, a momentary malfunction of my equipment, a product of my own solitude. But the cartographer in me, the part that sought to understand, to map the unknown, compelled me forward. This symbol, this inexplicable cold, this unnatural silence, it was a deviation, an anomaly that demanded investigation. My curiosity, a trait that had always served me well, now felt like a dangerous lure. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning in my lungs, and adjusted my grip on my hiking poles. The path ahead, barely visible through the thickening fog, seemed to beckon, promising answers, or perhaps only deeper questions. I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my gut, that I was no longer just mapping trails. I was stepping onto a path that shouldn't exist. The ordinary world, my comfort zone, was already a distant memory, a mirage dissolving behind me. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a vast, silent maw slowly closing around me. As I continued, the air grew heavier, the dampness clinging to my clothes and hair like a second skin. The spongy ground beneath my boots seemed to absorb all sound, creating an unnerving quiet that amplified every beat of my own heart. The redwoods, once majestic and awe-inspiring, now felt oppressive, their sheer scale creating a sense of claustrophobia despite the open air. Their dark, rough bark seemed to watch me, and the deep shadows they cast stretched and wreathed with an unsettling life of their own. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine, a feeling that I was being observed by something unseen. It was a sensation I couldn't rationalize, a purely instinctual dread that whispered of eyes in the perpetual twilight. The fog, which had been a gentle companion, now felt like an active participant in the growing strangeness. It swirled and shifted, obscuring my vision, making the familiar trees appear and disappear with disorienting ease. A particularly dense bank of mist ahead seemed to swallow the path whole, transforming the forest into a labyrinth of shifting gray. I hesitated, my hand tightening on my compass, which still spun erratically. My scientific mind fought against the rising tide of irrational fear. It's just fog, Alara. It's just a magnetic anomaly. There's a logical explanation for everything. But the words felt hollow, a desperate mantra against the undeniable chill that permeated everything. I pushed through the thickest part of the fog, my visibility reduced to mere feet. The fog drip intensified, a relentless, rhythmic patter that now sounded less like water and more like a deliberate, heavy tread, always just out of sight, always just beyond the reach of my straining ears. It was a sound that seemed to follow me, a phantom presence moving in tandem with my own steps. I tried to quicken my pace, but the uneven terrain and the clinging mist made it difficult. My breath came in ragged gasps, not from exertion, but from a growing, suffocating dread. Suddenly, a flash of movement at the very edge of my peripheral vision. A tall, dark shape, indistinct against the gray, seemed to phase in and out of existence within the fog. It was gone before I could fully turn my head, leaving behind only a lingering impression of impossible height and an unsettling stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I stopped dead, straining my eyes, trying to pierce the veil of mist. Nothing. Only the endless, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. Was it a trick of the light? A branch swaying in a non-existent breeze? Or had I finally seen a glimpse of the something that was making this forest feel so wrong? My mind raced, trying to reconcile the inexplicable with my ordered world. I was a cartographer, a woman who dealt in facts, in measurable distances and tangible landmarks. Yet, everything around me was defying logic. The compass, the cold, the symbol, the silence, the fleeting shadow. They were all pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit into any known framework. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, despite the chill in the air. This wasn't just a hike anymore. This was an intrusion, a trespass into something ancient and profoundly unsettling. The forest, which had always been a source of peace, now felt like a living, malevolent entity, slowly revealing its true, terrifying nature. I was no longer an observer, I was a participant, drawn into a narrative far older and darker than any map could ever depict. The path ahead, once merely a shortcut, now felt like an irreversible descent into the unknown, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that there was no turning back. My curiosity had not just pulled me in, it had trapped me. The symbol on the redwood, the inexplicable cold, the erratic compass, and the profound, unnatural silence, these anomalies had shattered the comforting illusion of my ordered world. My cartographer's mind, trained to find logic in every contour and coordinate, wrestled with the raw, visceral fear that now pulsed beneath my skin. I tried to rationalize, to dismiss it as a confluence of rare natural phenomena, a localized magnetic field, a sudden cold front, an optical illusion in the fog. But the sheer wrongness of it, the way the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, defied every scientific explanation I could conjure. My curiosity, once a guiding star, had become a dangerous current, pulling me deeper into the heart of the unknown. I pressed on, my hiking poles now less tools for navigation and more like extensions of a desperate need to understand, to quantify the unquantifiable. The path, if it could still be called that, grew increasingly indistinct, swallowed by the encroaching undergrowth and the pervasive mist. The towering redwoods, once symbols of ancient majesty, now felt like silent, watchful sentinels, their immense trunks forming a claustrophobic labyrinth. The fog drip continued, a relentless, rhythmic patter that had morphed from a mere environmental sound into something insidious, a constant reminder of an unseen presence. It was no longer just water. It was a cadence, a slow, deliberate thump. Thump, thump that seemed to echo the frantic beat of my own heart. I found myself constantly scanning the shifting gray veil, my eyes aching from the strain, desperate for a glimpse of whatever was moving just beyond my perception. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every gnarled root to twist into an unsettling shape. The air, heavy with the scent of damp soil and decaying wood, now carried a faint, metallic tang, like old blood or stagnant water, a smell that prickled at the back of my throat and made my stomach clench. Hours bled into an indistinguishable stretch of time. My sense of direction, usually infallible, began to fray. The compass remained useless, its needle spinning a frantic, meaningless dance. My GPS, too, flickered erratically, losing signal in the dense canopy, then briefly regaining it, only to display coordinates that made no sense, placing me miles from where I knew I should be. It was as if the very fabric of space was warping around me. I tried to retrace my steps, to follow the faint indentations my boots had left in the soft earth, but the fog seemed to erase them almost as quickly as I made them. The forest was actively disorienting me, turning its familiar grandeur into a weapon of confusion. The fleeting glimpses of movement became more frequent, more defined, yet never clear enough to confirm. A tall, dark shape, impossibly slender, would appear at the edge of my vision, only to vanish the instant I turned my head. Sometimes, it felt like a shadow detaching itself from a tree trunk, then melting back into the bark. Other times, it was a ripple in the fog itself, a disturbance in the air that suggested something massive yet unseen was passing through. My internal monologue, usually a calm, analytical stream of thought, devolved into a desperate argument with myself. It's fatigue, Alara. You're dehydrated. Your mind is playing tricks. There's no such thing as invisible giants. But the rationalizations felt increasingly flimsy, like a thin sheet of ice over a bottomless chasm. The fear was no longer a prickle. It was a cold, heavy weight settling in my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. I stumbled upon a clearing, or what appeared to be one, where the trees seemed to recede slightly, creating a circular space. In the center stood a cluster of stones, arranged in a pattern that was too deliberate to be natural. They were rough, hewn, ancient, and covered in moss, but their placement suggested a purpose, a design. My mind immediately flashed to the mystery walls I'd read about, enigmatic stone structures found in other parts of California, compared to crop circles or Stonehenge. These weren't walls, but they shared the same unsettling sense of ancient, unknown builders, of something placed here by hands that predated recorded history. As I approached, the cold intensified again, radiating from the stones themselves, a deeper, more profound chill than I had felt before. It was a cold that felt less like temperature and more like an absence, a void. A low, guttural sound, unlike anything I had ever heard in the wild, emanated from the center of the stone circle. It was a deep, resonant hum, almost a growl, that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath my feet. It wasn't the hum I'd felt near the symbol. This was deeper, more primal, filled with an ancient malevolence. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to run as fast as my legs could carry me, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. My eyes darted around the clearing, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. But the fog swirled, thick and impenetrable, revealing nothing. The fog drip around the edges of the clearing seemed to quicken, a frantic, almost mocking rhythm. Then the air shimmered. Not a visual distortion, but a sensation like looking through heat haze, except it was cold. The stones in the center of the clearing seemed to ripple, their ancient surfaces momentarily blurring, as if the very fabric of reality was thinning. And through that shimmering, for a split second, I saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. A colossal indistinct form, darker than the deepest shadow, taller than any redwood, seemed to coalesce within the stone circle. It was immense, its outline vaguely humanoid, but stretched and distorted, its limbs too long, its head too small, or perhaps non-existent. It was a fleeting, terrifying glimpse, a shape that defied all natural laws. Something that truly shouldn't exist. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the shimmering air and the swirling fog, leaving behind only the lingering metallic scent and the profound, oppressive cold. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, landing hard on the damp earth. My pack dug into my back, but I barely registered the pain. My mind reeled, trying to process what I had just witnessed. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't fatigue. It was real, and it was here. The rational part of my brain, the part that had always sought logical explanations, shattered. This was beyond science, beyond maps, beyond anything I had ever encountered. This was the monster, the unknown or unknowable, that had been teasing me, hinting at its existence. And now, I had met it, however briefly, however indistinctly. A new, chilling realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a strange phenomenon I could observe and then leave behind. The symbol on the tree, the erratic compass, the pervasive cold, the disorienting fog, the fleeting glimpses, and now this was all connected. I wasn't just lost in the woods, I was trapped in them. The forest wasn't just a setting, it was an active participant, a living, breathing entity that was slowly, deliberately closing in. My initial curiosity had pulled me into a nightmare, and now there was no easy way back to the normal world. I was forced to start reacting to my new normal. The first plot point had arrived, and it was a terrifying, irreversible shift. My initial goal of mapping forgotten trails felt ludicrous, a naive pursuit in the face of this ancient, malevolent presence. The silence that followed the glimpse of the entity was even more terrifying than the growl. It was an absolute, suffocating silence, devoid of even the fog, drip. It was the silence of a predator waiting. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest, but a new surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I had to move. I had to get out. But where? Every direction looked the same. A wall of shifting gray and towering dark trees. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against the silence. My breath hitched in my throat. I was no longer just afraid. I was terrified, a primal bone, deep, terror that stripped away all pretense of scientific detachment. The forest had claimed me, and the something within it was now fully aware of my presence. The game had changed. The glimpse of that colossal, indistinct form, darker than shadow, taller than any redwood, had ripped through the last vestiges of my scientific detachment. My rational mind, once my most trusted tool, lay shattered, replaced by a raw, primal terror. This wasn't a magnetic anomaly, or a trick of the light, or the product of fatigue. This was real. This was it. The something that shouldn't exist. And it was here, in these ancient woods, and it was aware of me. The silence that followed its brief manifestation was the most terrifying sound of all. The silence of a predator, waiting, watching. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. Every nerve ending screamed at me to run, to flee blindly, but where? Every direction was a wall of shifting gray, a labyrinth of towering, dark trees. My initial reaction was pure, unadulterated panic. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. My eyes darted wildly, trying to pierce the swirling fog, desperate for any sign of an escape route, any familiar landmark. But the forest had become a living, breathing entity, actively working against me. The trees seemed to shift, their immense trunks blurring into an indistinguishable wall, the ground spongy and silent, offering no clear path. The fog, drip, which had briefly ceased, now resumed, a slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump that seemed to mock my terror, a constant reminder of the unseen presence that stalked me. The metallic tang in the air intensified, a cloying, coppery scent that made my stomach churn. I forced myself to breathe, to push back against the rising tide of hysteria. Think, Elara. You're a cartographer. You understand patterns. There has to be a pattern, a logic, even to this. But the logic was gone. The compass was still useless, spinning wildly. My GPS remained a dead weight, its screen stubbornly blank. I was utterly, irrevocably lost, not just geographically, but existentially. The comfort zone of my ordered world had been utterly obliterated, replaced by a nightmare reality where the laws of nature bent and broke. This was the midpoint, the moment of truth, where I realized that merely reacting, merely trying to escape, was no longer enough. This thing, whatever it was, had me, and if I was to survive, I had to understand it. I had to engage with it. This shift from passive victim to desperate investigator was born not of courage, but of a profound, chilling necessity. My original goals, mapping forgotten trails, finding quiet solitude, now seemed ludicrous, a naive pursuit in the face of this ancient, malevolent presence. The entity wasn't just a random occurrence, it felt deliberate, purposeful. It had drawn me in, and now it was revealing itself, piece by terrifying piece. I remembered the symbol on the redwood, its unnerving precision, its alien geometry. It wasn't a warning, it was a mark, a claim. I began to move again, not running, but walking with a grim determination. My eyes fixed on the shifting fog ahead. I was no longer trying to escape from it, but to move towards understanding it. I started talking to myself, a low, desperate murmur in the silence, trying to articulate the inexplicable, to force some semblance of order onto the chaos. What are you? What do you want? My voice sounded small, fragile, swallowed by the vastness of the ancient trees. The forest offered no answers, only the relentless fog drip and the oppressive weight of its unseen inhabitant. As I ventured deeper, the manifestations of the entity became more frequent, more audacious. The tall, dark shapes at the edge of my vision were no longer fleeting glimpses. They lingered, indistinct yet undeniably present. like colossal distortions in the very air. They moved with an impossible fluidity, phasing in and out of the dense fog, their forms never quite solidifying, yet their presence was a crushing weight on my senses. I felt a profound cold radiating from them, a cold that seemed to drain the warmth, not just from the air, but from my very soul. The metallic scent grew stronger, a cloying, sickly sweet odor that made my head ache. The forest itself seemed to respond to its presence. Trees that had stood firm moments before would suddenly appear gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. The ground would ripple beneath my feet, not from an earthquake, but from some unseen force moving just below the surface. I saw ancient, moss-covered stones, similar to the ones in the clearing, appearing sporadically along my path, forming strange, incomplete patterns that hinted at a larger, terrifying design. It was as if the entity was actively reshaping the landscape around me, bending reality to its will. This was the confirmation phase, where the monster's presence was solidified, demonstrably gaining strength and a foothold. I could feel its power, an overwhelming, crushing force that made my own existence feel insignificant. My attempts to use my cartography skills to find some logical anchor became increasingly futile. I tried to map the anomalies, to plot the locations of the cold spots, the symbols, the shifting shadows. But the data was chaotic, nonsensical, defying any known geographical or physical laws. It was as if the forest itself was mocking my efforts, twisting the very concepts of space and direction. My scientific instruments, once my trusted companions, were now useless, silent witnesses to a reality they could not comprehend. This growing isolation, the severing of my connection to the rational world, was a direct manifestation of the horror itself. There was no one to call, no authority to convince, no scientific body that would believe my crazy ideas. I was utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. The dark night of the soul descended upon me with the deepening twilight. I found myself huddled beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient redwood, shivering uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from a profound, bone-deep despair. My attempts to understand, to fight back, had led me only deeper into the abyss. Every path I took seemed to lead back to the same unsettling patterns, the same chilling presence. All hope seemed lost. I had failed. I was lost, truly lost, in a world that had become alien and hostile. The entity's power felt absolute, its presence overwhelming. I articulated my fear in a desperate internal monologue, a silent scream against the suffocating silence. It's too big, too old. It's been here forever. It knows me. It wants something, but I don't know what. And I can't stop it. My mind replayed the fleeting glimpse of the entity, the impossible height, the indistinct, vaguely humanoid shape. It was a something that defied description, a creature of pure dread. I thought of the legends of Northern California, the Dark Watchers, giant human, like ghosts visible at twilight, staring at nothing visible, vanishing before your eyes. Or the walkers, invisible, tall creatures emitting radio static. This entity felt like a culmination of all those fears, a primal horror given form, or rather, formlessness. It was the unknown or unknowable, and its power was growing with every passing moment. The physical toll was immense. My body ached, my head throbbed, and a persistent, nauseating chill had settled deep in my bones. But it was the psychological torment that was truly breaking me. The constant uncertainty, the blurring of reality, the profound isolation, it was a systematic dismantling of my sanity. I was no longer just afraid for my life, I was afraid for my mind. The forest, once a source of comfort, had become a psychological prison. its ancient trees whispering promises of madness. As the last sliver of natural light faded, plunging the forest into an impenetrable darkness, the rhythmic fog drip seemed to intensify, becoming a relentless, mocking heartbeat. I could feel the presence now, closer than ever, a vast, cold shadow pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just observing, it was encroaching. My attempts to solve the problem, to find a way out, had met with unequivocal failure. I had reached my lowest point, genuinely believing I had truly lost. This was the nadir, the temporary defeat that felt absolute and inescapable. The internal and external conflicts had intensified dramatically, pushing me to my absolute breaking point. I was trapped, utterly at the mercy of the something that shouldn't exist, and the terrifying realization settled deep within me. The final conflict was inevitable. I was locked into it. The dark night of the soul had passed, leaving me hollowed out, yet strangely resolute. Huddled beneath the gnarled roots, the profound despair had given way to a cold, hard clarity. My attempts to escape, to rationalize, to simply survive, had failed. The entity, the something that shouldn't exist, had me. It had systematically stripped away my comfort, my logic, my very sanity. But in that absolute nadir, a new, desperate purpose began to coalesce. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't fight it physically. But perhaps, just perhaps, I could understand it. I could find a way to sever its hold, not on my body, but on my mind, on my reality. This was my new plan, born of desperation, a final, terrifying gamble. My body screamed in protest as I pushed myself upright. Every muscle ached. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, and the pervasive, unnatural cold had seeped into my very bones. But a strange, almost manic energy now coursed through me, a grim determination that transcended exhaustion. I was no longer just a cartographer lost in the woods. I was a survivor, a desperate explorer charting the contours of a nightmare. My eyes, once wide with terror, now narrowed, searching the swirling fog not for an escape, but for clues. The fog drip, that relentless, mocking rhythm, now felt like a countdown urging me forward. The metallic tang in the air, once nauseating, now seemed to sharpen my senses, a constant reminder of the entity's proximity. I began to move, slowly at first, then with a more deliberate pace, not following any discernible path, but drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain. It was as if the entity, in its relentless pursuit, had inadvertently laid out a breadcrumb trail of its own influence. I focused on the anomalies, the sudden drops in temperature, the areas where the fog seemed to thicken unnaturally, the subtle distortions in the air, the faint, low hum that vibrated through the earth. I was mapping its presence, not with a compass and GPS, but with my raw senses, my heightened fear. My internal monologue, once a desperate argument, became a focused, almost obsessive analysis. It feeds on fear. It distorts reality. It wants to isolate, to break connections. The thought was a chilling revelation, a personal truth that resonated with the systematic erosion of my own sanity and my increasing isolation. The forest responded to my shift in focus. The shadows seemed to deepen, coalescing into more defined, yet still indistinct, forms at the periphery of my vision. They were taller, more numerous, pressing in from all sides, their presence a crushing weight. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic scent, and the cold intensified to an unbearable degree. A draining chill that felt like my very life force was being siphoned away. I could feel its immense power, its ancient malevolence, a force that had been here for millennia, perhaps since before these colossal redwoods first sprouted from the earth. It was the knowable, the something that defied all natural laws, and it was now making its undeniable presence known. I stumbled into another clearing, larger than the first, dominated by a single, impossibly ancient redwood. Its trunk was wider than any I had seen, its bark gnarled and twisted into grotesque, almost screaming faces, and etched into its surface, not just one, but dozens of the alien symbols, glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence. They pulsed in unison, a slow, rhythmic beat that mirrored the fog, drip, and the frantic pounding of my own heart. This was it. This was the heart of its domain, the nexus of its power. As I stepped into the clearing, the air shimmered violently, not just a heat haze, but a profound distortion of reality. The fog swirled, coalescing into a colossal, towering form directly in front of the ancient redwood. It was the entity, fully manifested, yet still indistinct, a shifting, undulating mass of pure shadow and impossible angles. It was immense, far taller than the tallest tree, its vaguely humanoid shape stretched and distorted, its limbs impossibly long, its head a featureless void. It was the Dark Watcher of legends, the Walker of whispers, a primal horror given terrifying, albeit fluid form. A sound emanated from it, not a growl, but a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the very ground, through my bones, through my teeth. It was the sound of pure static, a high level of radio waves that assaulted my ears, making my head ring. My mind screamed, trying to break, to flee into the comforting oblivion of madness. But I held on, clinging to that desperate resolve. It wants to sever connections. It wants to isolate. In that moment, a terrifying realization dawned on me. A personal revelation. That was the true horror. The entity wasn't just a monster in the woods. It was a manifestation of the woods, or rather, of the ancient, forgotten, and violated aspects of it. The logging, the desecration of ancient lands, the forgotten towns like fox swallowed by the forest. It was a wound, and this entity was the infection, the primal scream of a violated wilderness. It fed on the fear of those who trespassed, those who disturbed the ancient balance. My fear, my isolation, my shattered sanity. It was its sustenance. The entity lunged, or rather, the space around it warped, and suddenly it was closer, its immense, cold presence suffocating me. I felt tendrils of pure dread reaching into my mind, trying to pry open the last defenses to consume my consciousness. I saw flashes of impossible landscapes, of ancient, forgotten rituals, of other victims, their faces contorted in silent screams. This was the climax, the final battle, not of physical strength, but of will, of mind. I closed my eyes, not in surrender, but in a desperate act of defiance. I focused on the one thing it couldn't take, my own internal landscape. I pictured my maps, the precise lines, the ordered contours, the tangible reality I had always known. I pictured the warmth of the sun, the sound of a normal breeze, the scent of a city street. I fought back with the very essence of what it sought to destroy: connection, order, the human spirit. I refused to be isolated. I refused to be consumed. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat, not of fear, but of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a scream that defied the silence, that shattered the illusion of its absolute power. The static shrieked, the cold intensified, and then, abruptly, it receded. The pressure eased. I opened my eyes. The entity was still there, a colossal, shifting shadow. But it was further away, its form less defined, as if my defiance had momentarily weakened its hold. The symbols on the tree still glowed, but their light seemed to flicker, less potent. The metallic scent began to dissipate, replaced by the damp, earthy smell of the forest. It hadn't been defeated, not truly, but it had been repelled. My will, my refusal to break, had been a weapon it hadn't anticipated. I stumbled out of the clearing, my legs shaking, my body trembling uncontrollably. The fog still clung to the trees, but it felt less menacing, more like a natural phenomenon. The fog drip was just water again. I walked, not knowing where I was going, but driven by an overwhelming need to put distance between myself and that ancient redwood. Hours passed in a blur of exhaustion and a strange, almost euphoric relief. Eventually, through a thinning of the trees, I saw at a faint, almost imperceptible trail leading towards what looked like a distant, hazy light. Civilization. I emerged from the forest days later, a ghost of my former self. My clothes were torn, my body covered in scratches and bruises, my face gaunt and streaked with dirt. The first people I encountered, a pair of park rangers, looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. I tried to tell them, to explain the cold, the symbols, the shifting shadows, the colossal entity. My words came out in a jumble, incoherent, the language of a mind that had seen too much. They nodded, their eyes filled with pity, attributing my state to exposure, dehydration, and the trauma of being lost. They didn't believe me. They couldn't. The threat is not acknowledged by the powers that be. I am back in my apartment now, surrounded by the familiar comforts of my ordered world. My compass works again, my GPS has signal, and the air is free of that cloying, metallic scent. But the forest, the something within it, is not gone. It lingers. In the quiet moments, I still feel the profound cold, hear the rhythmic fog drip that sounds like deliberate footsteps, see the shifting shadows at the edge of my vision. My sleep is haunted by glimpses of that colossal, indistinct form, its featureless void of a head. The world, once a place of measurable distances and tangible landmarks, is now permeated by an unsettling ambiguity. I know, with a chilling certainty, that there are more things in heaven and earth than my maps could ever depict. The redwoods still stand, ancient and majestic, but for me, they are forever tainted by the memory of what they conceal. The something is dormant, perhaps, but not vanquished. It waits, a primal force in the heart of the wilderness, ready to ensnare the next curious soul who dares to trespass. And I, Alara Vance, the cartographer who sought to map the unknown, am now a living testament to its existence, forever marked by the terror that shouldn't exist. The story doesn't end with a neat resolution. It ends with a lingering unease, a psychological residue that ensures the horror persists long after the final page.